September 11, 2001 made victims of all groups of people, firefighters included. During the disaster, they faced their greatest fears as they tried in vain to prevent thousands from dying in the Twin Towers. They were there as people burned to death, suffocated, and even jumped to their deaths. They pushed through debris, smoke, and flames in order to be our heroes. And many of those heroes also became victims, losing their lives in the fires. The firefighters left had not only lost the battle, but also lost their brothers. After the disaster, their bravery was paid with physical and emotional repercussions. Hundreds of rescue workers, firefighters in particular, had been exposed to toxic pollutants. Some of the debris from the World Trade Center contained asbestos, lead, and mercury, which the firefighters inhaled as they tried to rescue the victims. Because of this, some firemen have since developed serious respiratory diseases. Others were seriously injured as they climbed up the towers. Those that are sick or injured as a result of working at Ground Zero find it almost impossible to receive compensation. It seems as if, despite the bravery of these heroic firefighters, the government is compromising their health.
The women who became widows as a result of the events of 9/11 faced not only the loss of their husbands, but also the great emotional pain that resulted from their lack of answers to the attacks. 4 particular 9/11 widows, known as the Jersey Girls, began to put pressure on the White House to reveal the truth of their husbands' deaths. Their perseverance helped push the White House to begin a 9/11 Commission report. This report brought the widows only more pain because it continuously denied the presence of any 9/11 warnings, and the commissioners did whatever they could to avoid directly answering the widows' questions. For example, the White House received warnings in August of 2001 of a planned attack on the White House by Osama bin Laden, but the Commission denied the presence of any 9/11 warnings. The events of 9/11 and the actions of the White House harmed American widows by hiding the truth they needed to put their minds and their husbands to rest.
The events of 9/11 prompted a huge surge of emotion, of grief, of patriotism, and unfortunately of fear and hatred. Mainstream news coverage of 9/11 presented stereotyped frames of Muslims, which negatively affected many Americans' perceptions of Islam. News stories refer to the events of 9/11 as Muslim terrorism, categorizing all Muslims as terrorists, ignoring that the individuals responsible were extremists and not representatives of the religion or the region. Fanatical Muslims prompted the news to portray Muslims in general as such. Perhaps the greatest misconception presented by reporters and news anchors was the use of the terms Arab and Muslim interchangeably, despite the fact that the vast majority of Arab Americans are Christian. This confusion of religion and ethnicity and the focus on negative depictions of Muslims and Arabs led to the affiliation of Islam with terrorism. The negative framing of news media greatly influenced the amount of racial profiling in the United States. After 9/11, individuals from any multitude of diverse countries in the Middle East and South Asia, even those of Latino descent, were seen as a potential threat by many Americans and were victims of hate crimes. In what was justified as a surge of patriotism, but really a violent backlash against those thought to be Muslims, there were over 700 hate crimes committed in the 3 weeks following 9/11. The Orientalist depiction of South Asians and Arabs in the media as turbaned radicals led to at least 208 hate crimes against Sikhs alone. The violence of hate crimes escalated, resulting in 4 homicides. On September 15, 2001, just days after 9/11, Balbir Singh Sodhi, a Sikh gas station owner, was murdered. He was confused for a person of Arab ethnicity because of the clothes he wore, his turban, and his beard.
Can you introduce yourself for us, please, Jake?
Hi, my name is Jake Langbecker. I'm a senior at the University of Wisconsin, and I was born and raised in New York City.
All right, how did 9/11 impact you?
9/11, I mean, fortunately enough, didn't impact me directly. I didn't know anyone lost in either of the towers, but definitely changed things for me. One of those just surreal days that, you know, you hear your parents or grandparents talk about, whether it's things like Pearl Harbor or whatever. It's just one of those things that when it happens, you never really believe that it could happen or that it did happen. You just kind of really, especially for, I think I was a 12-year-old kid, you know, really wakes you up to some of the problems in the real world.
What role did fear play after 9/11 for you?
I mean, fear, I think, definitely played a huge role for me. I'll never forget the first day I got a cell phone, and it's not because I'm some spoiled kid who loves cell phones. It's because it was September 12th, 2001. My parents knew instantly, you know, on a day like that where it was so hard to reach your loved ones, how important it was to, you know, have that accessibility. So, you know, that was one way fear played a role. Additionally, I used to commute about 60 city blocks to school, and I would take the subway to commute. And after 9/11, my parents wouldn't let me take the subway because, one of the things the news and the government talked about was that if another terrorist attack happened, it was quite possible it could be on a public transportation, in the subway, that sort of thing. So it impacted my daily routine. And then additionally, my parents freaked out a little bit because of all the fear. We've got this one closet in our apartment that's filled with like plastic sheathing, a hand-cranked solar-powered radio, jugs of water, non-perishable food. It's basically the, like, if another attack, if a chemical, terrorist attack sort of happened, it would be like how we would like safeguard our apartment. And so, fear definitely impacted me that way.
Did you fly that December?
Yeah, we went on a family vacation that December. We were flying internationally to London, and I just remember. So I guess only 2 months afterwards, it's just being in the airport. I used to love flying. I was so excited, little kid. Pilot gives you the wings, whatever, and everyone just seemed so serious at the airport afterwards. And fear played a big role. All the signs about the it's orange level this, all the announcements over the loudspeaker, everything just seemed so much more serious, and I think fear definitely played a role in the wake of 9/11.
The effects of 9/11 for Americans hit much deeper than just for the people of New York. People across the country were outraged that the press decided to broadcast this image of a man falling to his death in papers across the world, a victim who was forced to make the decision to jump from the burning towers. Citing it as poor taste and exploitive of the last moment of a man's life as a means of good ratings, the public condemned the media representation. The events of that day overwhelmed the American public. But the image of the falling man personalized the disaster to a much deeper level for so many. It made people face the brutality of the situation so many people were put in. The brutal images of 9/11 made people recognize that this attack was something that just happened to Americans on what seemed to be a normal September Tuesday.
In the wake of 9/11, the government has created a new fallacy of evil, the ever-present threat of international terrorism, specifically Al-Qaeda. There is evidence that no such hierarchical network exists, that the U.S. diplomatically invented Al-Qaeda to perpetuate the myth of the nation, keeping society in fear. For years, the government garnered support through incentivizing happiness, the dreams of a better tomorrow. People believed in the government because of their ability to offer us a brighter future. Yet recently that trend has changed. Rather than presenting the masses with an ideal image of a more successful society, politicians have instead infused the masses with dismal images of a society at its potential nadir, nightmare cynicism designed to draw out our fear. Without even knowing it, we see fear every day, on the TV, in the newspapers, coming through the radio. It's the same fear that the government uses to keep the masses in check, which is exactly the concept one can apply to the government's treatment of 9/11 and the threat of international terrorism. Ultimately, this non-existent threat continues to affect people around the world, especially Americans, who have been duped, ignored, and repressed by the government in the name of fear.